Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the program. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. It is really good to be with you this Saturday evening, April 6th. How is everyone doing? Hope you all well. Thanks so much for coming out to watch this stream tonight. As you're coming in, make sure and please hit that like button. That helps boost the stream and the algorithm. Give me a quick sound check for all those who are already here, already in the chat. Would really appreciate that. That helps a lot. I want to say hello to all of the moderators here today. I see Desert Mantis here today. I see Joe OWS here today. Who else do we have? That might be all, unless they just have not commented yet. But it's good to see the moderators here. Good to see all the viewers. Thanks so much for the sound check. It's Saturday, and so we have a packed show. Hello, everyone on Rumble. Thanks so much for tuning in on Rumble. Of course, you can follow me there. Just search my name. Hello to the Rockfin community as well. And of course, welcome to all the Patreon and Substack and YouTube members here. As always, that's the best way you can support this channel is by becoming a member either on Patreon, Substack, or YouTube. Those links can be found in the video description below. So we have a lot to get to today. We're going to be talking a lot of what's happening in West Asia, especially vis-a-vis Iran and its preparations for what is at least being called in the West, in the United States, as an imminent attack on Israel in retaliation for the absolutely horrific war crime committed in Syria against the Iranian consulate embassy there. So that is right now in the works. That's the big story. And we're not even a week out from that attack, and we're already talking about retaliation. It's unclear whether it will happen, but we're going to cover what we know thus far, particularly from the panic-stricken United States and, of course, Israel, which I'm going to go over how Israel actually is in a lot more trouble than I think meets the eye. And I'm going to talk a lot about that today. We also have stories on Ukraine, of course, and on China. Hoping to get to all of them. Also would love to get to your questions as well at the end of the show. So I'm hoping we can cover the stories with relative good time and move on to a nice question and answer. So we have a lot to get to. So we're going to first start off with Iran, because this is a huge development. There's a lot of pressure all across the region and the world for Israel to be held accountable. Of course, for what it's doing in Gaza, which is an absolute atrocity, a genocide, a war crime upon war crime upon war crime against the people of Palestine. And that has, of course, set off a lot of pressure in the region for there to be a wider response. And so I remember when I was in China, just a quick tidbit before we get to the story. When I was in China, my first time, late 2019, early 2020, you may remember that is when Qasem Soleimani, one of the heralded Iranian general, was killed. And I believe he was killed in Iraq and by the Trump administration, ordered by the Trump administration. And the response by Iran, I mean, it was a response, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't what I would call an aggressive response, given the absolute gravity of the war crime committed there. And so the reason for that is because the region was in a lot different of a place. There was a lot more stagnation. The United States was weakening and weakening and weakening in terms of its presence in the region. Iran has played the long game for so long. Now, though, there is this horrific atrocity being committed that is putting a lot of pressure on Iran to even step up more than it already has for the Palestinian cause. Remember, Iran is the chief supporter really in the region, especially when it comes to state actors, when it comes to nation states. Iran is really at the top there in the axis of resistance. So we have a lot to get to. We have a lot of stories to cover. So let's get started. Keep hitting that like button. Keep hitting that notifications bell. Subscribe to the channel, of course. And to support this channel, go to the video description and hit those links to support this channel. So let us get started now. And we'll wait for the siren to leave as well. So here we go. The situation in West Asia and the Middle East is indeed intensifying. The escalation of Israel not a week ago to begin the month of April, striking the Iranian consulate in Syria, killing several of Iran's top generals and several other military personnel, has been met with a furious promise by the Iranian government and, of course, the entire axis of resistance of a response. And the United States has been on alert. There have been talks. I think the Swiss have been mediating talks between the United States and Iran. There has been communication. And it appears that a response is going to happen soon, likely before the end of Ramadan. However, many should note, and we should all note, that we do not know exactly when Iran will respond and retaliate. And that I agree with those who say that Iran would be well served, as they always have, in not taking bait from Israel, not being dragged. It's Iran itself that is counseling the United States, I'll get to that in a minute, to not be dragged into a regional war because of Israel. So it's quite clear that this could happen at any moment. It could happen as soon as before the end of Ramadan, before the end of the week of April 10th, or it could happen later. We don't know. But the United States says it's preparing for a significant Iran attack on U.S. or Israeli assets in the region as soon as next week. So this is the breaking CNN report of April 5th. It says the U.S. is on high alert and actively preparing for a significant attack that could come within the next week by Iran targeting Israeli or American assets in the region in response to Monday's Israeli strike on Damascus that killed top Iranian commanders, a senior administration official told CNN. Senior U.S. officials currently believe that an attack by Iran is inevitable, a view shared by Israeli counterparts, that official said. The two governments are furiously working to get in position ahead of what is to come, as they anticipate Iran's attack could unfold in a number of different ways, and that U.S. and Israeli assets and personnel are at risk of being targeted. Now, mind you, it's important to note that Iran is going to target military assets. They're not going to target civilians, people. People are not going to get in harm's way of this. This is likely going to be a strike on Israeli military assets. It's unclear where, though. Will they strike in the heart of Israel? Will they strike at its proxies wherever they are? It is hard to predict, but a forthcoming attack was a major topic of discussion when Joe Biden spoke to Benjamin Netanyahu, Israeli prime minister, on Thursday. As of Friday, the two governments did not know when or how Iran planned to strike back. A direct strike on Israel by Iran is one of the worst case scenarios that the Biden administration is bracing for, as it would guarantee rapid escalation of an already tumultuous situation in the Middle East. Such a strike could lead the Israel-Hamas war broadening into a wider regional conflict, something Biden has long sought to avoid. And remember, there was the Al-Tanf attacks by the Iraqi resistance, if you don't remember, not too long ago, earlier this year, which was another kind of firestorm that just absolutely shook the United States in particular, because that was a direct hit on U.S. military assets. So it's been 2 months since Iranian proxies attacked U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria, a period of relative stability after months of drone, rocket, and missile launches targeting U.S. facilities. The lone exception came Tuesday when U.S. forces shot down a drone near Al-Tanf garrison in Syria. The drone attack, which the Defense Department said was carried out by Iranian proxies, came after the Israeli strike on the Iranian embassy in Damascus. We assessed El-Tanef was not the target of the drone since we were able to immediately determine the target out of safety for U.S. and coalition partners. The drone was shot down. So this is the entire resistance, and I'm going to get into this later, how the entire axis of resistance is really making things hard for Israel and the United States and putting on as much pressure as they possibly can to stop what is happening in Gaza. So they don't know anything. They're saying they're prepared for a significant attack. Okay, and that Zahidi, who was killed, right? Mohammed Reza Zahidi was very important. And remember, these consulates, these embassies, they are protected by international law. They have diplomatic immunity, and we're going to get into why that is. So, the United States denied the attack. They don't know where it's going to come from, but they said it is coming. But the reason why they know it's coming, okay, is because Iran is the one that has been warning about this. Iran, and I'm going to pull up the story now, has warned the United States, don't fall into the trap, Iran warns. Israel is bracing for an Iranian counterattack after Tehran's embassy in Damascus was struck. So Iran warned the U.S. to stay away from any potential clash between itself and Israel, while Washington has cautioned Tehran against targeting American facilities, says presidential aide Mohammad Jamshidi on Friday, April 5th. So Iran was the one to say there's going to be a response, and you are going to have to essentially make the right choice. That's what Iran was saying. Make the right choice. Don't mess around, because you may find out you are in the middle of something that you cannot you cannot tolerate, you cannot handle right now. And this is both political and military. The United States doesn't want it on any side or end of this. The economic fallout, the military fallout, the political fallout will be disastrous for the United States. The Biden administration is very, very, very delicate right now in terms of its status. So in a written message, the Islamic Republic of Iran warned the United States leadership not to get dragged by Benjamin Netanyahu's trap for the U.S. Stay away so you won't get hurt, said Jamshidi on X. In response, the U.S. asked Iran not to target American facilities. So there you go. You have the Iranians themselves warning the United States not to get involved. Why? Because there's going to be a strike. And now we see Iran making real preparations here for if this thing is going to get out of control. Because I'm going to show you in a minute the comparisons between Iran and Israel and how a war between them, of course, it would escalate into a broader regional war, could drag in the United States. And that's because Iran is actually quite formidable as a nation with a very strong and advanced military. But here is Iran. Here's some breaking news. It says Iran has started deploying hundreds of its advanced air defense units. The main and most important air defense machine that Iran possesses is the Bavar 373, a reverse-engineered Russian S-400. It's capable of targeting stealth targets. So this was from a Telegram channel. It's unclear whether we can verify this or not, but nonetheless, there is the video of the air defense systems being sent out, possibly in need of being used, should the response from Iran occur and cause a further escalation, because Israel has said that it will be prompted to respond should Iran retaliate. And mind you, remember, Iran has every right. That was a war crime that was committed. So you commit an act of war, nations have the right to defend themselves and to respond back as an act of deterrence. This is, in fact, what the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, this is what the Iranian government is saying. And this is actually a fact of international affairs, of war, of geopolitics, of international law. If someone commits an act of war against you, you have the right to engage in warfare for self-defense. So nonetheless, though, let's listen to friend of the show, Scott Ritter, his reaction to a possible Iranian response. He gave this report on Sputnik. All right. And we'll listen to part of this and then move on to the comparison of the Iranian military and the Israeli military. So here we go.
In the span of a week, the world has witnessed two wanton violations of international law and the norms and standards of civilized nations by the State of Israel. The first of these was an attack against the Iranian consulate building in Damascus, Syria. That building was giving host to several high ranking members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Command. But the fact that Israel views these officers as legitimate targets doesn't give them the permission to violate the protections that are afforded to these structures. Diplomatic immunity is a reality, and these buildings, consulates, embassies, are afforded the inviolability of the protection of international law, and Israel opted to violate this. The consequences of this Israeli action have yet to be fully borne out. The world is standing by, awaiting a likely Iranian response, the timing and the specificity of which remains unknown, but based upon Israel's own reaction and anticipation, could be quite severe.
So not only this, now that we know that the United States has been warned, it's unclear whether the intelligence, we have to understand that United States, Israeli intelligence, constantly wrong, a lot of times intentionally wrong, in order to to escalate, to generate fear in the public so that they can engage in illegal warfare, essentially. That is generally how the United States and Israel's intelligence agencies, especially abroad, have operated and at home as well. But also, we have to remember that this attack that Israel committed on Iran in Syria did not just kill military personnel, it killed Syrian citizens. I believe at least 6. Who knows how many really were killed? And so this was a devastating attack. This was, I think it was an F-35 that dropped this. And so you know that the United States has a hand in this. The United States says they didn't know anything about this, which is absolutely ludicrous to me. But let's get back to Scott.
And this could throw not just the region, but the world into chaos, turmoil, and conflict, all because Israel decided that it could operate above the law. But operating above the law is the norm, the standard for Israel. And we saw that in the second action, the assassination of 7 aid workers working for WCF, a charity and an aid organization whose sole function is to feed people who are hungry, regardless of their ethnicity, their religion, their race, their creed. WCF fed Israelis and they fed Palestinians alike. But that was the problem, you see. WCF fed Palestinians, and the Israelis don't want Palestinians, especially those who live in Gaza, to be fed. Israel is in the process of implementing a policy of the depopulation of Gaza, eradicating it of the presence of Palestinian people.
So I wanted to play a little bit of that before we get into the military analysis, because we have to remember that this is the central root cause of why there are regional tensions right now to such a fever pitch. They're always there. We have to remember Israel is a Zionist entity literally occupying the region. Yes, Palestine, historic Palestine indeed, but also the Golan Heights, which is Syria. And we can't also forget how Israel has a hand all across the region in sowing chaos, whether it's covert, whether it's through airstrikes in Syria, so on and so forth. So it is Israel's actions that is at the root of this, and it's only so ironic or coincidental that this also comes as Israel has committed once again another horrific war crime against the World Central Kitchen aid workers, some of them former British intelligence, mind you, but a lot of Westerners were killed. That's why there was a big fuss about it in the Western mainstream media. But the real point here is that Israel has been doing this from the very beginning of this war, has killed hundreds of UN workers, has killed, of course, over 15,000 Palestinian children, likely many more, not to mention the tens of thousands of Palestinians that have been killed, the prevention of aid. We can go on and on and on, but that is the main reason why there are tensions right now rising to this fever pitch. And Iran is responding to a war crime committed against it that is at the root caused by Israel's absolute desperation. They are desperate. They want to provoke the United States into a regional war in order to save Israel from what is, in fact, a crumbling and decaying situation. Israel is in big trouble. They know it. They know that they are more and more isolated than ever. And they know that no matter how long they are able to commit this massive slaughter, they understand, the establishment, the ruling establishment in Israel understands that time is ticking because its whole entire existence was always on borrowed time. And now you have the axis of resistance, of course, becoming more and more powerful. And here is Iran. Sputnik did a great little analysis of the military situation between Iran and Israel. There's a reason why, despite Israel's bluster, there's a lot of fear for the United States in particular. Israel would never say it because Israel always has to look tough, right? They have to look like that attack dog that they are. But the United States is very concerned because Israel, as we will see, Israel has not so many advantages militarily. It is bogged down in Gaza by the Palestinian resistance, and any kind of tripwire that Israel decides to cross with the axis of resistance could very well lead to the end of Israel. And so why is this the case? Well, let's just look at this comparison. Who's tougher? Says Sputnik. The escalation in tensions between Tehran and Tel Aviv following Israel's missile strike on the Iranian embassy compound in Damascus on Monday has revived fears of an all-out conflict between the Middle Eastern powers, but which nation's military is better equipped for a large-scale conflagration? So as Israel braces for retaliation to its deadly attack on the Iranian diplomatic compound in the Syrian capital, with officials fearing Iran's response may include long-range ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, or drones, experts have warned that a direct tit-for-tat response may be exactly what Israel is looking for, suggesting Iran could achieve equally effective results using asymmetric means. While the two countries do not share a common border, each has missile, aerial, and naval tools to cause one another serious harm if tensions turn hot. Here's a breakdown of their capabilities. So this is important to note because it would be an absolute disaster and a mess if if Iran and the Zionist entity of Israel got into a literal shooting war. It would be a disaster. It would immediately go global. The United States would not be able to sit back. The United States has exercised zero diplomatic power over Israel. So this is the disaster that the Biden administration can't afford. Why? Because look at the comparisons here. The International Institute for Strategic Studies in early 2023 said that the IDF had 169,500 troops and about 465,000 reservists. Let's just say those are worthless. Those are just people with no experience, combination, all that. The ground forces include 126,000 troops. Air Force employs 34,000 personnel, 55,000 reservists, 9,500 personnel in the Navy. You have, but Iran's armed forces has 420,000 troops. Okay, that's a lot. This includes 350,000 servicemen in the Army, 37,000 personnel in the Air Force, 18,000 in the Navy, 15,000 in Air Defense Forces. You notice there was nothing here about reservists. Okay, these are forces that are ready to go. They're not those who are just called up out of their jobs, working in factories or whatever. No, these are professional military personnel. The Islamic Republic also has 230,000 troop-strong force of elite Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps troops, 150,000 in the ground forces, 40,000 paramilitaries, 20,000 in the IRGC Navy, and 15,000 in the air and air defense forces. It also has at least 350,000 trade reserve personnel to call up in the event of a crisis. So that's a lot. Why do you think that is? That's a lot. Those are huge numbers. And the reason for this, of course, is that Iran is a country that's been at war several times. Iran has, since 1979, it had the U.S. instigated Iraq-Iran war. And of course, we can go on and on and on with the fact that it is surrounded by wars always, mainly because of the United States and Israel. So Iran has been preparing for this moment for a long time, and those numbers definitely show it. So you have the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute calculating in 2022, Israel spends about $23.4 billion on the military, while Iran has a budget equivalent of $6.8 billion the same year. But it makes up for the smaller budget by lowering operating and armed procurement costs and, of course, asymmetric warfare as a member of the Axis of Resistance. And remember, there are sanctions on Iran, so it has to do things a bit differently than Israel. So let's see weapons. Both countries have large domestic defense industries, allowing for production of everything from small arms and tanks to drones and missiles. Israel has built up its defense sector in cooperation with the U.S., while Iran, subject to decades of sanctions, looked inward to produce as much of its defense needs domestically. Israel is likely to have an important trump card, nuclear weapons, while neither confirming nor denying its possession of such arms, a deliberate ambiguity. And also remember that Israel practices this ambiguity with these very strikes on foreign territory. When Israel strikes Damascus or Syria, generally, it has not admitted to the strike, despite the fact that the United States has admitted it was Israel that killed the Iranian generals in the embassy in Syria. You'll never hear Israel admit to anything that it does, and this also includes building a nuclear weapon stockpile, having up to 80 air and missile deliverable nuclear weapons. And so Iran, though, has rejected it. Of course, you all know about the Iran nuclear deal. There's been a lot of pressure for Iran to actually develop nuclear weapons, like a lot of nations have done in order to protect themselves as a deterrent, like the DPRK, for example. But they do not have it. Okay. So then combat experience. So fighting over a dozen wars and counterinsurgencies, both in neighboring countries and with Palestinians from 48 onward, Israel is by far the more battle-hardened military in the Middle East. However, the ongoing conflict in Gaza has demonstrated its combat prowess is not something passed on between generations, despite as it faces considerable problems fighting Hamas and other militants in Gaza. With the pace of the operation against the 25 to 40,000 troop force much slower than expected and casualty already heaviest among any 21st century conflict Israel has had to date. So Iran has considerable combat experience as well. As I said, the Islamic Revolution was forged in the fires of brutal conflict with Iraq, which lasted through the 1980s. It cost up to 600,000 Iranian and 500,000 Iraqi troops, and over 100,000 mostly Iranian civilians were killed. In the decades since, Iran's military gained experience in multiple other conflicts, from domestic insurgencies to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps advisory assistance to Hezbollah against Israel in the 2006 Lebanon war, to the Syrian and Iraqi governments during their fight against foreign-backed, U.S.-backed militants in Iraq and Syria. So if the crisis, so we're talking about allies now. Allies, of course, you have Israel having the United States. You also have, of course, the vassal states, right? In the Gulf, they're not allies, but they indeed are useless. But you have military bases that form a ring around Iran, including in Iraq, Jordan, Syria, and Turkey. Then you also have the Fifth Fleet. The U.S. presence in the region includes this, a forward deployed strike carrier group, logistics, mining, demining, submarine, and reconnaissance forces. It has used this Fifth Fleet extensively for past wars of aggression, such as Afghanistan throughout the past 2 decades. And so, of course, I spoke about the axis of resistance, Syria, Iraq's resistance. You have Lebanon's Hezbollah, and you also have the battle-hardened Houthis. And, of course, you have the fact that Iran is part of the multipolar world. So good on Sputnik to conclude those factors, because it is very important to note that the multipolar world plays a role in how such a war would come about. But as you can see there, this is not going to be a cakewalk for Israel should Iran respond. And it has been Iran's own ability to withhold and restrain itself from these provocations that has, to be honest, uh, given the opportunity, so many opportunities for peace to thrive in the region. But it's been Israel, it's been the United States that has constantly provoked a response from Iran, has tried to provoke a response from Iran in order to really save Israel. That's what this is really all about. Because while the United States has an overarching objective of destroying Iran, the United States is very willing to play a long game, at least the majority of its neocon foreign policy hawks. They're willing to play a relative long game. Israel doesn't have the time. And now that Israel is beleaguered, embattled, completely mired in a guerrilla war that they cannot win, they cannot win it because they don't fight that way. With the Palestinian resistance, they have met their match, and now they are finding out that the regional situation is not favorable to them. And they understand that Benjamin Netanyahu clique, as well as really the entire Israeli political establishment, and unfortunately, much of its so-called civilian settler population, which has a huge stake in the continued expansion of Israel, they are all finding out that the situation for them is not as favorable as it may have once been in the past. This war, we can't even call it a war, this genocide in Gaza has been possibly the spark that lights the match to the flame that takes Israel into ashes. And it would be, I think it would be remiss not to note that Iran has these capabilities. And this isn't even mentioning the entire axis of resistance. So Iran's response could be coming very soon. Whatever it is, it's going to be measured, it's going to be smart, and it's going to be done with the aim of not expanding this into a broader war, particularly with the United States, because that would shake up everything from the global economy to the regional situation in ways that would take away from the Palestinian cause. So Iran is going to do this carefully. They're likely going to hit Israeli military assets, and they're probably going to hit them pretty hard, but it won't be a response that will pull in the United States. The United States has tapped out unless the response is to the degree where Israel finds itself forced by political pressure to ignite a war that would be unthinkable, especially in regards to, as Sputnik said, and as we should all know, Israel has nuclear weapons. And that is really why there is such a huge problem right now when it comes to stopping Israel. There is the nuclear trump card that Israel has that is difficult to overcome. And so Iran's response is coming. We're going to have to continue to watch. But the point here is that this is not going to be pretty for Israel. This is not going to be easy. Not only is it not going to be easy, but the whole world is watching, and much of the world wants to see Israel held accountable, especially in the region. Of course, in Iran, there have been huge marches. Al-Quds Day just happened. Huge marches in support of Palestine. There's huge numbers of people angry about what happened to General Saidi. And so Iran has to respond. What that will look like, we will have to see, but it's likely going to be big. And Israel is going to have to take note that it does not have the military advantages that we all were told it had. And so there will be hell to pay should the United States, should Israel take this too far. The Biden administration cannot handle it. And so we're going to have to see what happens. All right, everybody. We're going to get into another story because I want to get into now how the axis of resistance, okay, has actually been creating a situation very favorable for its not only for its continued rise, right? Because the axis of resistance is making a huge difference. There's a lot of pessimism about the axis of resistance in the West, at least for those who are paying attention, who watch my program. I want to just say that this is going to be a little different, where this is not going to be pessimistic. This is actually going to, I hope, generate some optimism about the situation in the Middle East and in West Asia, because this situation in particular is not linear. It is not black and white. We are seeing the axis of resistance step up in ways that in my lifetime I have not seen in such a united and in such an impressive showing. It has really been an impressive showing. And I'm going to go over some recent developments that have occurred in the Middle East, which shows that there are reasons for Israel to be concerned. While Israel is moving its embassy, it's closing its embassies in various states around the region, and I think other parts of the world. I think it's getting ridiculous. Israel is trying to stoke. I believed, and maybe we'll just get started with the story right now. Keep hitting that like button. Keep hitting that subscribe button. Keep hitting that notifications bell if you're new here. And of course, go to the video description and support in all the ways, in whatever way you can. Patreon being the best place. You can find all of those links in the video description. So let's actually get to the story, because I want to show you how Israel is in big trouble. Okay. And it's not just Iran. Iran is a big worry for Israel, but it's not just Iran. So here we go. Iran isn't alone, and Iran doesn't stand alone when it comes to the larger opposition that exists in West Asia to Israel's onslaught, not just in Gaza, but the entire region. Because, of course, all the news, the headlines are being taken up with, will Iran and Israel go to war? And whatever Iran's response is, it will likely be measured, calculated, and done with the very intention of not bringing the entire world into war because of Israel. It will be a response in self-defense to what was an act of war on itself. But nonetheless, the reason why Iran does not have to take incredible measures on its own to fight back against Israel is because there is a worldwide, but we are seeing a regional wide movement of resistance, real armed resistance, the kind of resistance that is protected under international law against an occupying force. And this resistance has been creating a lot of problems for Israel and the United States. And so recently, we're going to show that the response to what Israel has done, not just in Gaza, but of course in these war crimes like what happened in Syria against Iran, the response has already really started. So today, as of this recording, we're recording this on April 6th, we had the Haifa oil refinery coming under attack by drones. According to the Iranian news agency Mir, the attack was carried out in response to the Israeli regime's unprecedented crimes, and this was reported by the Iraqi resistance, the Islamic resistance in Iraq, which targeted the Haifa airport in the Israeli occupied territories. So the occupied port of Iliad has been targeted several times, also by Yemeni forces. We're going to talk about this, and the Islamic resistance of Iraq to declare support for the oppressed people of Gaza. So this is all in response. And so that happened today. It's unclear how much damage was done. But regardless, It is significant. And I just want to show you. I'm going to pull up a map. This is quite impressive. Okay. Just look at this. All right. You want to zoom in here. That is Haifa right there. Okay. Haifa's right here. All right. We're going really zoomed in. All right. Now we're going to zoom out. There's where Haifa is located. And I want to show you where Iraq is located. There's Iraq. So you're talking about a massive distance that has to cross Jordanian or Syrian airspace. Of course, it's most likely crossing Syrian airspace, but we know that the Islamic resistance in Iraq has a lot of forces. The Palestinian resistance in general has a lot of forces all across the region. And the Islamic resistance in Iraq has said that it's dedicated to training forces in Jordan. And this is interesting because the Jordanian government has been incredibly repressive to those who want to come to the aid of the Palestinian people, detaining people. And, you can follow good friend Richard Medhurst on those developments. But nonetheless, you have the Islamic resistance of Iraq hitting Israel. That's impressive. That means they have capabilities. They have military capabilities. They have drones. They have missiles. These are probably likely provided by Iran and also procured by these resistance groups in their own fights within their own countries. So then we have Hezbollah, of course. And I've covered that Hezbollah has the ability to rain down 1,000 cruise missiles in some ridiculously short period of time on Tel Aviv if they wanted to. But even just recently, they have downed Hermes drones. Okay. So the Islamic resistance in Lebanon, Hezbollah, announced its air defense forces downed an Israeli Hermes drone, 900 drone, violating Lebanon's airspace. And it marked the 11th operation for the day. So Hezbollah is very busy. Hezbollah is fighting, of course, in quote unquote northern Israel along the Lebanese border. And they are holding their own. They have basically depopulated that part of Israel because of the fighting that's going on there. So this is what's happening. You have Hezbollah also announcing its fighters have successfully shot down another drone on February 24th over a town in South Lebanon using unspecified surface-to-air missiles. So this is all showing that they can see what's going on. I won't show it just in terms of imagery. It's not that impressive so far away, but this is all to show that there are capabilities that the resistance has that Israel is quite concerned about. Of course, the biggest indication of how absolutely limited the United States and Israel are in meeting their objectives, which is the complete eradication of Palestine and, of course, the continued control of the resources of the region, to dominate the region, to occupy it, to destroy and to destabilize it. That is the U.S.'s goal. Israel shares that goal, slightly different models, slightly different ways, and slight differences in how that goes about. But nonetheless, both Israel and the United States are joined at the hip when it comes to this larger goal. But there's no act of resistance, okay, that has been more fierce, that has been more effective than the Ansar Allah movement, what's known as the Houthis in the West. The Middle East Monitor, here they're reporting that they targeted 90 Israeli, US, and UK ships since November. Ansar Allah, of course, based in Yemen, really the leading political force in Yemen now. So it says the leader of this move, of the Houthi movement, Ansar Allah, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, said in a televised speech yesterday that 90 Israeli, US, British ships have been targeted in the Red Sea, the Arabian Sea, and the Indian Ocean since the beginning of the group's operation in November. The Houthi leader stated that the group continues with its military operations in the Red Sea, Arabian Sea, and the Indian Ocean. Okay, this is serious. The Indian Ocean? We are talking about, okay, and I'll just pull up that map again. How about that? Because we're talking about a starved people, a people. Do you see what the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean? This is the ground that they're covering. Not only are they covering here, the Red Sea. Let me zoom in more. Here's the Red Sea. Not only are they blockading this, but they are also striking at ships headed toward Israel, all the way from the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean. A starved people that have been decimated and still are, as I will get to in a minute, decimated by US-backed Saudi aggression all the way up until recently, up until the last year or so. And still there's a military operation going on, and yet they are fighting back hard. In just 1 month, operations reached 34, carried out with 125 ballistic and winged missiles and drones. The Houthi leader also pointed to the continuation of operation against targets belonging to Israeli enemy in the Eilat port, known as al-Rashrash, in the south of historic Palestine. Neither Washington, London, or Tel Aviv has issued statements in response to this speech. But so while you have this massively effective, massively effective blockade going on, the reason why it's been effective is that the United States is showing now a willingness to diplomatically, and this is from Bloomberg, diplomatically engage with the Ansar Allah movement because of the impact that it's having. So it says the U.S. may revoke the Houthi terrorist label if they stop the Red Sea attacks. Washington is seeking diplomatic off-ramps, says Yemen's envoy. The Houthis have been attacking ships in the Red Sea since November 2023. The U.S. said it would reconsider its recent designation of Yemen's Houthis as terrorists if the Iran-backed militants cease their shipping attacks in and around the Red Sea. My hope is that we can find diplomatic off-ramps, said President Joe Biden's special envoy for Yemen, Tim Lenderking, who told reporters this in an online press briefing. To find ways to de-escalate and allow us to pull back eventually, the designation and, of course, the end of military strikes on Houthis' military capability. Okay, so the comment suggests Washington is once more leaning on diplomacy after nearly 3 months long of a campaign of airstrikes against Houthi facilities in Yemen. Those have failed to stop the group's missile and drone attacks against merchant vessels and warships, though the U.S. says it has managed to degrade the Houthis' military capabilities. Asked by Bloomberg News after the briefing if the U.S. was offering a quid pro quo to end their attacks on ships in return for revoking the designation, Lenderking said, "We would certainly study that, but not assume it's an automatic thing." Okay, so that's the point. The point is that this is having a real impact on the United States. They are kind of tapping out, in all honesty. If that isn't a sign of this, I don't know what is. And so here's the thing. One of the big reasons why Ansar Allah is so scary to the United States is because it is it is a force that has nothing to lose, that is willing to literally go to the source, and they're not alone. So if Ansar Allah is going to basically sacrifice everything for the Palestinian cause, that only empowers the rest of the axis of resistance, which, as Forbes noted not too long ago in March of this year, they're not the only group backed with cruise missiles that can reach Israel. All right. So, of course, they say Iran backed to make them seem scary. But, of course, Iran can reach Israel, as I've noted. And you have the rest of the axis of resistance having similar capabilities. So imagine if this got to the point where you not only had this blockade going on, but you had an intensified level of attacks. This is why Nasrallah, right, of the Lebanese movement, this is of the Hezbollah movement, this is why he says all the time that there is a problem brewing for the Zionist regime, and that is the fact that the resistance is strong enough should the time come where it's needed and where it's necessary. It's strong enough to not only hold its own, but to facilitate the collapse of the Israeli regime. So the Israeli military has confirmed that a cruise missile fired by the Houthis in Yemen hit an open area near the southern Israeli city of Eilat early Monday. This was back in March 2024. The Yemen-based group is not the only militia in the region with cruise missiles that can strike Israel. So they've launched several bullets. So the Houthis themselves have launched several ballistic and drones toward Israel since October. Really, they started in November. Israel's multi-layer air defenses and U.S. Navy intercepted several of these munitions. There's speculation that the Houthis used their longest-range cruise missile, the Iranian-designed Quds-3, since that's the only type of group known to possess a capability of reaching Eilat from, or I'm saying it wrong. I always say it wrong. Eilat, whatever. I don't care. It's not what it's called. They stole that land. So from Yemen. Unlike ballistic missiles, cruise missiles can fly at low altitudes and follow a flexible path, making them less predictable and potentially difficult to intercept. It's unclear if the Houthi missile successfully evaded Israeli air defenses or if Israel merely determined it wasn't a threat to any populated area. While the Houthis' vast array of missiles and drones have repeatedly grabbed headlines since October, the Yemen-based group isn't the only regional Iran-backed group with missiles like these, which is significant since these other groups are also situated much closer to Israel. In Israel's immediate vicinity, there's evidence that Iran has attempted to help Hamas build cruise missiles inside of Gaza. So, of course, we know we know the Al-Qassam brigade. They have if you've watched these videos, I won't play them here because this channel will literally get shut down if I do. But if you just follow the Palestinian Resistance News Network, or if you follow anything on X and you see the Al-Qassam brigades, you know what they're capable of doing. Further afield in the same month, Iran-backed militias in Iraq revealed they have Quds-2 cruise missiles, and we saw how they're hitting Haifa port with drone strikes. And then less than a week later, we have other Iran-backed groups that claim they targeted Israel's second city of Haifa, which was called a enhanced cruise missile named Al-Arqab. Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah also claimed a cruise missile fired from Iraq had hit Haifa and that Israel kept the incident secret. And this is the case. We don't actually know how targeted Israel has been. I had a hard time actually finding these stories at all. There's not a lot of coverage in the US media, European media, Western media, mainstream media in general at all. So, you have Ben Gurion Airport being targeted in Tel Aviv. Of course, you had the Eilat port that's been repeatedly targeted by Yemen and by other resistance groups. So, in a sense, the resistance is not alone. Okay. Ansar Allah is not by itself. Iran is not by itself. That's why the response to Israeli war crimes has been calculated, because war is not a dinner party, and it's also not about how badly you can destroy your enemy. It is about understanding your enemy's capabilities and understanding your overall and overarching goal. And the goal of these groups, of course, is to facilitate the liberation of Palestine, as well as the liberation of the region from Israel and, of course, U.S. occupation. But that cannot be done in one fell swoop because of the massively destructive consequences that would have, based upon the fact you cannot trust Israel or the United States, essentially both of them, especially Israel at this moment, being rabid animals. When you think about their military strategy, their desire to burn everything that moves against them in any kind of way, peaceful or otherwise. That is to say that, or that is not to say that these groups cannot defend themselves and cannot stand up for themselves as all of this is going on, meaning that they have the capabilities to fight a war. And we should not be so remiss. They are already fighting, and they're doing not only the best that they can, but they are making a real impact, in the sense that at no other point in history has Israel's standing in the world, and also Israel's future, been more grim or bleak. It has never been this bad in its 70 whatever year history of brutal occupation and genocide. So here, I just want to show you one last thing. As the United States is talking and saying, and this is why this is important, as the United States is saying, well, we need diplomatic off-ramps because we cannot defeat Ansar Allah, and surely they're saying the same thing to Israel. You cannot go toe-to-toe with the entire resistance, because that's what's going to happen if you decide to go into a regional war with Iran or with Hezbollah, everyone is going to get involved. And you are not going to be able to get as much assistance as you think from us, because we are also not willing to politically sacrifice everything for you, Israel. Like this is the struggle going on. The United States is willing to kill Yemenis, as you see here. Even when they're tied with diplomatic off ramps, they're killing 37 and 424 strikes alone the same day they're claiming they want a diplomatic off ramp. The leader of the Ansar Allah movement cited 37 casualties and 30 injuries from 424 U.S. and British airstrikes in Yemen, disrupting global shipping. And targeting Red Sea International. So that's because of the movement. Okay. So this was reported by the Times of India. So, I mean, the United States is more than willing to allow Israel to commit a genocide. It's more than willing to in pockets, bomb, destroy other countries. It is not willing to fight the entire resistance with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps at its head. It's not willing to do that. Why? Because the United States understands that would be the end of Israel, and that would be the end of the U.S.'s presence, short of a nuclear war. This is how bad it has gotten. This is the situation that the region and the world is in. Israel decided to cross that line into a genocidal campaign in Gaza, as it had probably always had planned, given all of the statements that we've heard from Israeli officials. This is not just a response to Al-Qassam's military operation, the resistance's military operation. No, this is also a strategic imperative of the Israeli regime, and it always has been. There's a reason why Gaza in the West Bank and the divisions and the land grabs and the settler occupation. There's a reason why over 8,000 Palestinians have been imprisoned in the West Bank since October 7th. And it's because there is a plan to depopulate and destroy, ethnically cleanse all of historic Palestine so that Israel can get on with the goal of expanding even further than this. This is why there's a regional resistance. This is why it's important to note just how powerful that resistance can be and is. And it's important to note that when you're feeling disappointed, when you're feeling like the world isn't doing enough, just remember that these resistance forces are moving along a very delicate strategic, political, military, and economic landscape, which includes Israel and the United States possessing nuclear weapons, which I don't think either, if you understand these two rabid imperial entities, would not be shy to use if their interests were threatened. This is why this is going on in the manner it's going on in. But make no mistake, the resistance has been ready from the beginning and are doing just an incredible job of placing pressure on Israel, placing pressure on the world, placing pressure on the United States, to the point where the United States is beginning to tap out. The Biden administration is trying to find an off ramp. It just can't, because it has, as the United States ruling elite and foreign policy establishment has always been, it has never been able to crawl out of the hole it dug itself when it decided to give it all up, to give essentially into all of Israel's demands in order for political, economic, and military expediency and influence in the region. That is the main impediment. It's the United States that needs to be on the phone, actually asserting influence over Israel, but it won't and it can't. And that's why we're in the situation we are in, where it's going to be up to the resistance. It was always going to be the Palestinians and the region and whoever supports them in the world to determine the destiny for the region. And we're seeing it up close. We're seeing it day by day. We don't even know the extent of it really outside if we are not there ourselves, because it's not being reported on. So these reports definitely indicate that it's not just Iran that's going to be at war should something explode in this region because of Israel, it will be really the entire axis of resistance, and they are prepared to strike hard and strike back and move toward the goal of both Palestinian liberation and, of course, the the assertion of real self-determination against the U.S. and Israeli aggression in the region. All right, everybody. We're about an hour in now. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notifications bell. You can support this channel, of course, by hitting the like button. It boosts the stream in the algorithm. And then if you are able, please do support in the video description on Patreon. That's the best place to support this work. You can really make a huge difference in sustaining the work here, ensuring that this work expands and continues, especially at the pace that it is. By subscribing on Patreon, you get to suggest guests and ask questions, and there's so many other things that you can get on Patreon. Substack and YouTube are also options as well. I appreciate everyone who supports here, whether by monetary means or not. Your help has made this channel, which is rapidly approaching 200,000 subscribers. It's been an incredible run here. You'll want to be sure to continue to support this work as we continue to grow. It's been incredible. So thanks so much for all who have made this possible, especially you viewers out there now, all 5,000 of you plus. All right, it's really been appreciated. So we have let's go to Ukraine now. Okay, how about that? Because we got to get to Ukraine. Ukraine is not looking good for Ukraine, guys. You all know this, though. You all know this. It's not looking good at all for Ukraine. It has not for quite some time. Okay. So here we go. Alarm bells are ringing in the collective West regarding the situation in Ukraine. They've been ringing for quite some time now, especially since the failed so-called summer counteroffensive essentially ended with just immense defeat at the end of the fall of 2023, leading to a massive decimation of Ukraine's military capabilities, huge losses in manpower, and of course, the decision of the United States Congress to essentially change its direction in Ukraine, one from all in to debating the aid that Ukraine is supposed to be getting, over 60 billion worth, that has been held up for months now, not to mention a military disagreement with Ukraine that has been ongoing, that now has finally shifted into some kind of, and this is why it's important to know that Ukraine is not an independent government, that Ukraine put up some fight to the United States' insistence for Ukraine to stop with its mentality of throwing everything it had, everything that it was given by the United States and NATO into these meat grinder situations like Bakhmut and Avdiivka, and finally shift to a more so-called defensive posture, a long war strategy, which of course Russia has been employing since the very beginning with very, very favorable results. But nonetheless, the collective West is ringing its alarm bells because Russia, Vladimir Putin, we just had an immense victory from Vladimir Putin politically, where it is shown that in the regions that are supposedly occupied, Vladimir Putin received a higher percentage of the votes than even in the proper Russia proper territories in the capitals like Moscow. You have for example, in Lugansk, I believe Vladimir Putin received over 90% of the vote. But on the other side, you have the Washington Post, right? This Amazon CIA funded, CIA owned essentially rag, admitting now that there is no options that are good for Zelensky. No way out of a worsening war, says the Washington Post. Zelensky's options look bad or worse. And here's what the Washington Post had to say. They said, as Russia steps up airstrikes and once again advances on the battlefield in Ukraine more than 2 years into its bloody invasion, there's no end to the fighting in sight. And President Vladimir Zelensky's options for what to do next, much less on how to win the war, range from bad to worse. Zelensky has said Ukraine will accept nothing less than the return of all its territory, including land that Russia has controlled since 2014, but with battle lines changing in the last year, militarily retaking swaths of East and South Ukraine that Russia occupies, 20% of the country, appears increasingly unlikely. Well, this is what we've been saying on this channel forever. The Western mainstream media is just catching up, but not for the same reasons. They're catching up because they need to wash their hands of Ukraine and make it a permanent war, while we've been saying this is a reason for Ukraine to essentially surrender and to do the right thing, which is to allow these territories to exercise their self-determination, which is what they wanted to do years ago. And in 2014 during the coup. Now we are seeing the Washington Post catch up, but it says negotiating with Vladimir Putin to end the war, something Zelensky has rejected as long as Russian troops remain, is politically toxic. The Ukrainian public is usually opposed to surrendering territory, and Putin has shown no willingness to accept anything short of Ukraine's capitulation. So this, of course, is the way to justify this, right? Oh, you can continue going to a permanent war because Putin is the problem. Russia is the problem. It's politically not feasible. Nobody wants it. Yet only 8% of Ukrainians really support an ongoing war, a forever war. So it's a bit dicey. Their facts. The status quo is awful. The fight now grinding to a stalemate. Ukrainians are dying on the battlefield daily. But a ceasefire is also a non-starter, Ukrainians say, because it would give Russians time to replenish their forces. Again, more mythology. Russia has hundreds of thousands of forces mobilized. They are not going through any kind of industrial military shortage. There's no need to replenish. They have what they need. They're showing it by using their forces quite methodically. And of course, the Western mainstream media always has just such contradictory, as I'll show later, on this issue of weaponry. They're always saying that Russia is running out of weapons, running out of people, projecting onto Russia, and then they'll say in another story, in the same story, that actually the opposite is true. Ukrainian Western officials view Zelensky as largely stuck. Aid from the United States, Ukraine's most important military backer, has stalled for months by Republicans in Congress. Previously approved modern fighter jets, the U.S.-made F-16, are expected to enter combat later this year, but in a limited quantity, meaning they won't be a game changer. So there you go. More admissions. So it's Russia with the weapons problems, essentially, but really everything that the United States is doing is also not a game changer, meaning it's Ukraine that has the problem. NATO countries are still exercising restraint in their assistance, evidenced by the recent uproar after French President Emmanuel Macron said European nations should not rule out sending troops. How will Zelensky get out of the situation? I have no idea, said one Ukrainian lawmaker. Like other officials and diplomats interviewed with this article, spoke on the condition of anonymity to be candid about the highly sensitive politics. Of course, it concerns me. Most tricky for Zelensky will be managing his own country's expectations. Support for him among Ukrainians remains high, but after 2 years of war and steep casualties, the solidarity is fraying, said one Western diplomat. So you have Timofey Melyanov, a professor at the Kiev School of Economics and former government minister, said the fight could drag on many years. It's an unpleasant thought, but when some people say it might take decades, no one challenges this. So there you have all kinds of mixed messages. You have to appreciate how committed these mother effers are to this war, because they'll say on the one hand, Zelensky's in big trouble. His popularity is fraying. Of course, they say he's wildly popular. I don't necessarily believe that, although I could see where what's remaining of Ukraine might still think of him favorably, because it's a war zone now and the entire country has been torn apart by it. But they say he has problems. They say there's a lot of concern, and then, nope, we're going to do this for another 10 more years. This was supposed to be an election year for Zelensky, but of course, Ukraine's constitution prohibits elections under martial law, with some officials here worrying that Russia will try to cast Zelensky as an illegitimate ruler once he is serving longer than his expected 5-year term, despite the inherent hypocrisy in Putin's own repeated disregard for term limits. So again, Putin is the problem. He's the reason why Ukraine completely destroyed whatever political openness and so-called quote-unquote Western style democracy it had, destroyed that, eliminated that because of the war, and because Putin would delegitimize Zelensky, as if there needs to be any help from Putin to delegitimize Zelensky, this literal pawn of the United States and NATO, who actually cannot shut his yap. He cannot stop talking, and he makes himself look like really a more pathetic version than any pawn has ever been, in the sense that he tries to act like he has some kind of push against his paymasters, and it has always backfired. Remember Vilnius? Remember the photos that came out of Vilnius? Zelensky is not an impressive person. He is not the reason why people see him as illegitimate. The world sees Zelensky as illegitimate because he does the West's bidding. No one in the global South, no one in the global majority, no one in Africa, Asia, Latin America, where the vast majority of people reside, have any respect for this guy. When was the last time China has invited Zelensky to China? Never. Like, it has not happened. Why? Because this conflict has showed just who Zelensky really is. Zelensky will also have to live up to his own promise, which he restates regularly, of returning Ukraine to its 1991 borders, including Crimea, the peninsula that, I don't need to explain it in their terms. Crimea was federated into Russia. And so now they're saying that smart people know it's not realistic to take back Crimea, said the Ukrainian lawmaker. Political leadership is needed to adjust this rhetoric at some point. That kind of sounds like there's rumblings of getting rid of Zelensky. This is why I wanted to show this article, that he's in big trouble. The Ukrainian regime is in big trouble because it's losing this war badly. Pessimism about Ukraine's battlefield chances has increased as Russian forces regain the initiative on the battlefield, largely because Ukrainians are short on troops and ammunition. So there you go. They have the problem. They're relying on Western partners for weapons, but a $60 billion security package from the United States has been stalled in Congress for 6 months. Meanwhile, Ukraine's government is struggling to address its personnel shortages as measures to mobilize more soldiers have divided society. Kiev is now bracing for the possibility that aid from the U.S. could be cut off. Mike Johnson said that the package could be put to a vote next week, but it's expected to face revisions, including perhaps providing the money as a loan, despite Ukraine's huge debt. I mean, that would be just a devastating occurrence for Ukraine, the whole project, Ukraine's legitimacy. And here's the thing: Republicans are not peaceniks. They are not looking for peace in Ukraine. That has to be noted. For everyone who looks at the Republicans as being a peaceful bunch, no, they don't care about peace in Ukraine. They care about political expediency and legitimacy. And they're seeing that all in support for Ukraine would not be favorable, not just with their voting base, but also with their political future. Because getting into a war with Russia that nobody really wants does not help a Republican Party just that also has its own problems domestically. So this is why the Republicans have taken this stance. They know that the Democrats have the presidency. They know that the Democrats have to stay in line with Joe Biden. So the Republicans have said, okay, we can do an about turn during an election year and try our best to hamper and hamstring the Biden administration to the point of defeat. This is an electoral move. It's not about peace, but it's hurting Ukraine because Ukraine is at this point of no return, where if it doesn't get what it needs soon, it will, I mean, it's going to be destroyed. It's going to be defeated, but it's just a matter of when. It will happen a lot sooner without it. So this delay has sent a clear signal that future assistance is not guaranteed, especially with the U.S. presidential election this year. Officials also worry Europe lacks the production capacity to compensate for U.S. shortfall, especially in artillery and air defense ammunition, Ukraine's biggest needs. Zelensky has said Ukraine is prioritizing domestic production, but so far makes only a small fraction of its needs. Russian forces are now firing 6 times as much as the Ukrainians on the line. I believe that's an underestimation. It's probably closer to 10 to 1. Look, we have been without ammunition for half a year already. Not enough of it, at least, said one senior Ukrainian official. Well, okay, it will get worse. So what? What other options are there? If partners who have promised to give us ammunition don't give it, of course the situation gets worse, but the image of the U.S. will get worse in the world. Imagine that. This is why they're speaking on anonymity. Imagine if that got out to the public. They're speaking to the Washington Post, and they're telling the Washington Post, so what that we don't have what we need to fight? What does it matter? Oh, if we don't get it, it's just going to make the U.S. look bad anyway. What about the people? What about the country? What about the economy? What about what happens to those poor Ukrainian brainwashed soldiers that are being sent out to die? That doesn't matter? These are lawmakers. These are people who are supposed to be representing Ukraine. Imagine going to, this is why these are the worst kind of puppets. These are the kind of puppets who talk huge because they have been given such a pass. This is true of the Israeli case now too. And it always has been to the point. Actually, Israel's worse because Israel can't even be called a puppet because Israel has such an enormous influence in the region and, of course, in U.S. Congress and the president and across all official channels in the U.S. So, but Ukraine is an actual puppet, and Ukraine now they're having these lawmakers go into the Western media basically saying we don't care about anything other than the fact that we either get it or we don't. If we don't get it, well, it'll make the U.S. look great. What about the people of Ukraine? I guess they don't care. This is what happens when you make careers out of a proxy war. It is absolutely vile. A year ago, the mood in Kiev was cautiously optimistic as Ukraine readied a large counteroffensive with modern tanks and fighting vehicles freshly provided by Western partners. But that assault failed to make significant any gains, and the new weapons did not prove decisive. Ukrainian strikes deep into Russia, targeting military infrastructure and logistics such as oil depots, which have increased, but Kiev's forces are still under pressure along the front line and have been pushed backward. Ukrainians have resigned themselves to a long war. Some have been fighting since 2014 when Russia first stoked the conflict. So here's the thing. Now they're saying long war because they know there is no more war left. How much we got left here? All right, we're almost finished here because this is important. This article just shows you the Western mindset right now. Okay. Ukraine does not have the power to make another offensive. There are 2 scenarios, said a Western ambassador. One scenario is to get the support to maintain defensive lines. The second is there is not enough support and Ukraine will defend itself anyway, desperately with less manpower. Ukraine and its partners must prepare for 2025 as another year of war, not peace talks. This is how the West is talking. If the West wants peace, it should only respond to current Ukrainian needs and use 2024 to provide Ukraine with everything necessary for offensive mode. It's delusional. It's delusional. They're saying they need to meet some of their needs on their own. And they're saying they need to deploy more people. They just reduced the conscription age in Ukraine. And this is despite the fact that you have Russia ready to mobilize more and more troops, over 300,000. So this is what is so just devastating about this. And I don't even want to the rest because what's important here is that there's no way out, is what the West is saying. The West is saying that Ukraine is in trouble. Ukraine is not going to win this war, but it has to continue fighting it because we say so. And you have Ukrainian officials literally going on the Washington Post saying, oh, yeah, we'll continue to fight it no matter what happens. It doesn't matter how much we're slaughtered, how much we're literally feeding people to the slaughter. It doesn't matter that we're just fighting a dirty war for the collective West. We're going to keep on doing it. That is why there's no way out, because the Ukraine regime and the collective West do not want a way out. They want to make this a long war themselves because a defeat would be politically anathema to the collective West. If the collective West was defeated in Ukraine at any point in the near future, it would have a lot to answer for. Its standing has already been decimated in the in the world because of the conflict here. It would only get that much more worse. It would cause instability among the political legitimacy of the so-called civilized collective West, that of course it would have shockwaves all across the world. So they want to make this happen as a long war now that they know there's no possible way of defeating Russia. And this was always going to be the case. They were never going to defeat Russia. And so that's why you have all these distractions. And one of the big distractions that has occurred, and I'm going to show you, is NATO. You've heard Emmanuel Macron, right? Here's the New York Times saying NATO wants to show support for Ukraine, but only so much. So here's the New York Times, okay? And you've heard Emmanuel Macron say over and over and over again, French president, we can send troops to Ukraine. You have Estonia backing that up. You have these more rabidly intoxicated leaders, intoxicated with war, with Russia, saying, "Yeah, troops to Ukraine. We'll fight this, and we'll fight this our way. We'll fight this with a total war mindset." Well, the problem with this is that it's not going to happen in that way. And there have been just over and over and over again promises to Ukraine for NATO membership, but they are not willing to cross Russia in this way yet. They're not willing to do it yet. And here's the New York Times saying that they admit Kiev is a non-starter, admitting it to NATO as long as there's a war with Russia waging, but member nations want to show their support in Ukraine for the long haul. So they're going to gather this summer for the 75th anniversary of the alliance. They don't want to see a resurgent military, but the alliance agrees against what Ukraine wants. Ukraine wants formal invitation, but they agree that's not going to happen. In July, NATO has no appetite for taking on a new member. That because the alliance's covenant of collective security would draw it into the biggest land war in Europe since 1945. It's searching for some middle ground now, NATO is, something short of membership, but meaty enough to show it's backing Ukraine for the long haul. What that will be has so far proven elusive, according to Western diplomats involved in discussions. So they don't know. But the point is Ukraine is increasingly looking like it is not the star of the show anymore. That because of how absolutely devastated Ukraine has become at the hands of Russian forces, the United States and NATO are admitting that this is the long haul. They're all talking about years and years and years ahead. All of this is pointing to the inevitable. Ukraine is not only is it not going to win, but it can't do anything but lose unless peace saves Ukraine, unless the United States and NATO are willing to participate or allow Ukraine to be saved by diplomacy. Nothing else is possible but defeat. Russia is growing at a rapid pace. I think there have been some month by month numbers showing 7% economic growth. You have all these attacks supposedly on Belgorod, on oil refineries in Russia by Ukraine's forces, drone attacks, etc. And what have they accomplished? Nothing. They've accomplished absolutely nothing. We haven't seen Russia budge. We haven't seen fear in Russia. Crocus, the attack in Moscow that likely, if not almost certainly, had Ukrainian involvement. What has that accomplished? Nothing but hardening Russia's ultimate objectives. It has cost Russia nothing in the way of political or military legitimacy or prowess. Nothing. Or economic legitimacy, prowess, and stability. Nothing. There's done nothing to that. There have certainly been people who have been killed. There have certainly been consequences that are devastating in themselves. The human cost. Russia is not coming out of this without scratches and wounds. Certainly, the wound of this conflict will last for Russia for quite some time because Russians have died. Many Russians have died by way of terrorist attack and, of course, on the battlefield. So, while those consequences are very real, the point here is that Russia cannot but win this war. It has really already won this war in many ways because we see the collective West's behavior as a clear indication of this. The NATO has no idea what to do about Ukraine. It's saying for the long haul, but it can't admit Ukraine as a member of NATO because what did Russia say? You do that, you're at war with us directly. It's no longer this, okay, you're going to send personnel into Ukraine, you're going to assist Ukraine, you're going to help Ukraine fight this dirty war. You're going to facilitate this dirty war via Ukraine. It's no longer going to be by proxy. It's going to be a direct Russia versus NATO conflict. And NATO does not want any part of that because that immediately enters the realm of nuclear devastation, which, of course, would destroy NATO itself. NATO itself is already demilitarized. Europe can't produce what Ukraine needs. The United States won't give everything that Ukraine needs because it has Israel, it has China that it needs to encircle. It has other priorities too. It cannot simply, as an empire, say Ukraine gets it all, even though it's quite clear that the United States probably wouldn't be able to make up for the shortfall anyway, unless it directly involves itself in a war with Russia. So here is the big problem. The big problem is that Ukraine is on the complete decline on the battlefield. It is being destroyed. Russia is moving west of Avdiivka every single day that this conflict rages on. That front line is getting pushed further and further and further back into Ukrainian territory. And there are many analysts and those following the conflict who see the battlefield situation deteriorating so badly in 2024 that 2025 is looking like a good time for a complete Ukrainian surrender. We shall see, because we know from what NATO is saying, what the United States is saying, they want to make this a forever war, a war without an end, a war that will certainly end Ukraine's existence as we knew it. There will be no post-Soviet republic that looks like Ukraine in 1991 or even 2014 any longer. There will be a war, the consequences of war, drawing the map differently. It will not look the same. But no matter how it looks, the collective West, if there's one thing the collective West can still do, it is prolong a war, it is push war, and it is to essentially shift the mode of warfare at any given moment because the collective West is invested in war. The collective West wants war. The collective West feeds off of war. It relies on war. Its entire economic and political system depends on it. So while it can't win wars, while it can't, and that's really never the point anyway, but it certainly can't win wars against these growing powers to the east. It certainly can't win wars even against legitimate resistance anywhere in the world. This has been shown true many times over against much smaller opponents than Russia. But what it can do is it can elongate the overall trajectory of war with Russia for as long as necessary and for as long as it can handle it. Because we know that the American empire, the collective West as a whole, is very overextended. We know that Ukraine has basically exposed that for most of the world to see. We know that these shortages, these production issues militarily, that's only touching the iceberg. It's only the tip of the iceberg of what is truly a major problem for the United States and NATO, which is it has these big, lofty ambitions of taking out all resistance, all opposition, all forces in the world that oppose its hegemony or simply are going a different path to its hegemony. And it cannot extend itself to the means necessary where it can actually take down take down the what remains of those forces that oppose its rule. So that is the big quandary that the United States, NATO finds itself in. Russia and China are not Iraq 2003. They are not. So you have a situation where much of the world is looking at Russia and China as an alternative pole, one that offers new opportunities for development free from war. And you also have the reality that the United States, that NATO simply cannot fight a war with these countries to the point where these countries go the way of an Iraq or an Afghanistan. There is going to be no regime change operation, no full scale military conflict that will achieve the objectives of full spectrum dominance that the United States and NATO has. That's the big problem here. And they have found their graveyard really in Ukraine. This is the center of where that big hole is being dug. And of course, the onslaught in West Asia, in the Middle East, and in Gaza, as well as this suicidal trajectory with China, all of these flashpoints are just more shovels into the graveyard that the United States and the collective West are building for themselves. And so we're going to have to keep an eye out on what happens in Ukraine in the coming days, weeks, and months ahead, because it is going in a very clear direction, Russian victory. And the only question we now have to answer is when? When will that occur? Okay, everybody. I might do one more story. Okay. That'll be four stories today. So, particularly, let me see. Okay. Let's see what we got here. Let me get it up. Okay, guys. Let me get these stories up. Let's do China. Leave your questions. This is going to be kind of a shorter story. So leave your questions if so I can do a little ask me anything to end the night, okay? So I'm gonna do a quick story on the situation with China, and then we can get that going. Okay, so let's do this. Here we go. Man, all right. Speaking of China, I'm actually going a week from today. So I'll be streaming with Scott Ritter and Garland Nixon Tuesday. And I believe that will be the last stream. That's April 9th. It's likely the last stream before I leave on April 13th. And then I won't be streaming. So it'll be a while. It'll be more than 2 weeks. I'll be gone from streaming. Um, I'll be back April 23rd with likely no streams until the day or two afterward. So yeah, I'll be in China. I'll definitely take some videos. I don't know if I'll be able to go live, but I'll have to take some videos from China. I'll be in Beijing. I'll be in many other cities. So let's do this, okay? Here we go. I talk a lot on this channel about the coming war with China that is being facilitated, instigated, and led by the United States. And what's so interesting about this war at the moment is that it is confusing to the naked eye. For those who are just looking at the surface level relations between China and the United States, one would have a very mixed understanding of what is going on. On the one hand, the United States military has sent Green Beret forces just a couple of kilometers away from China's coast to train for an eventual war over the island of Taiwan. That would appear to be a major escalation, especially when it comes to two major military powers in the world that have been in some form of conflict for many years now. However, there's also other indications that on the surface would look like the United States is trying to hedge its bets with China and pull back from the gravest form of forms of potential military conflict via so-called diplomacy. You had in November 2023 at the APEC, not the APAC, but the APEC, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Conference. At that summit, Xi Jinping and Joe Biden were present and they met. And of course, in the month of April 2024, they have spoken on the phone, just about 6 months since that meeting occurred. And now you have Janet Yellen there for the second time. I was actually in China the first time she went in July of 2023. And now she's there a week before I get to China in early April. Nonetheless, though, there have been some interesting moves. The United States claims that it is resuming talks on operational safety. This is from the Department of Defense's report. They say U.S.-Chinese military officials are resuming talks on operational safety. So they spoke. The two sides spoke in early April, saying that military officials from the U.S. and China met for working level talks focusing on ensuring safety and professional air naval interactions between their forces, and that the two discussions were held in Hawaii, Honolulu, marking the resumption of the Military Maritime Consultative Agreement Working Group, a series of operational safety dialogues. These dialogues were established more than 2 decades ago and were last held in December 2021. Do you know why they were stopped? I just wanted to trigger your memory. They were stopped after Nancy Pelosi decided to take a trip to Taiwan in August of 2022. And that trip was incredibly provocative and really put the United States and China at the brink of war. And so China's response was to cut off military to military ties. So this year's discussions, in the first since then, include representatives from the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, U.S. Pacific Fleet, and U.S. Pacific Air Forces who met their counterparts from the People's Liberation Army. The head of the delegation from the U.S. side, Army Colonel Ian Francis, who is the Indo-Pacific Command's Director of Northeast Asia Policy, said the delegation is encouraged by representatives from China's Army honoring their commitment to attend the talks. He said he looks forward to future discussions aimed at safeguarding forces operating in the region. Its primary means is to discuss air and maritime operational safety with the PLA. It will continue to operate safely and professionally, the U.S. will, in the Indo-Pacific, wherever international law allows, and we take this responsibility seriously. Do they? Do they take this seriously? This is why it can be confusing, because you might think, Danny, is the United States really trying to wage war on China? Because the news is so haphazard, it's so all over the place. Well, as these talks were happening, this was announced. US, Japan, Australia, and the Philippines are going to stage military drills in the South China Sea. So as these talks are happening, the US, Japan, Australia, and the Philippines will hold their first naval joint exercises, including anti-submarine warfare training and a show of force in the South China Sea, where Beijing's so-called aggressive actions to assert territorial claims have caused harm. The four treaty allies, security partners, are holding exercises to safeguard the quote-unquote rule of law that is foundation for a peaceful and stable Indo-Pacific region and uphold freedom of navigation over flight, they said in a joint statement. China was not mentioned by name, as they never do, or they try not to do, but the four countries reaffirmed their stance that a 2016 international arbitration ruling, which invalidated China's expansive claims on historical grounds, was final and legally binding. So they're probably going to be pretty big exercises too, because a reminder, the United States in all of these countries has immense investments, right? We have to understand that the United States is invested most heavily. You might think it's Ukraine. You might think it's the Middle East now that they're all in the news. No, the United States is most invested militarily in the Asia Pacific, but it's via proxies. It's the Philippines, it's Japan, it's Australia. These forces are militarized to the teeth with U.S. personnel. Japan has, I think, over 80 military bases alone. I might be underestimating that. It might be more than that, but I think it's over 80. So we stand with all nations, blah, 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 blah. Okay, we don't need to read that garbage. So Japan and Manila, they've all issued statements defending this, talking about sovereignty, talking about all of this. And it's so interesting that they're going to hold these drills as the United States says they're so concerned about safety, while the United States is holding military drills thousands of miles from its shores, where it really has no business. But it's not just this side of it. It's not just in the South China Sea, although this is an important part of the conflict. It really is all of the Asia Pacific. And here, the Washington Post reported that the Marines are retooling how they'll fight, preparing for a China war. So, mind you, while the United States says, oh, it's so concerned with safety in the South China Sea because it doesn't want to provoke a wider conflict, while these joint drills that were announced are not saying China by name. Here's the Washington Post just doing it for them. The Marines are retooling how they'll fight. U.S. troops are preparing for a conflict on an island-hopping battlefield across Asia against an enemy force that is home field advantage. This is how they're talking about this. This was just written in late March of this year, right as these talks were about to happen again, the consultative military-to-military talks. So here you have this report, okay, and I'm just going to read some of it. It says the Marine gunner knelt on the rocky soil of a 6,000-foot high volcanic plain. He positioned the rocket launcher on his shoulder, focused the sights of his target, a Ruster armored vehicle 400 yards away, and fired. 2 seconds later, bang, perfect hit, said his platoon commander. Do you see how they're getting you excited about a possible war with China? The gunner, 23-year-old Lance Corporal Caden Earnhardt, a member of the 3rd Marine Littoral Regiment, a new formation that reflects the military's latest concept of fighting adversaries like China from remote strategic islands in the Western Pacific. These units are designed to be smaller, lighter, and more mobile, and their leaders argue more lethal. Coming out 20 years of land combat in the Middle East, the Marines are striving to adapt to maritime fight that could play out across thousands of miles of islands and coastlines in Asia. Instead of launching traditional amphibious assaults, these nimbler groups are intended as an enabler for a larger joint force. Their role is to gather intelligence and target data and share quickly, as well as occasionally sink ships with medium-range missiles to help the Pacific Fleet and Air Force repel aggression against the U.S. and allies like Taiwan, Japan, and the Philippines. The Marines are training for this. They are training to assist, right? And here they are. Here they're showing it. I'm not going to go into those pictures too deeply, but you get the gist. They're training across islands. So do you get it? First island chain, islands stretching from Japan to Indonesia. That's where they're training. And what does this mean? It means that the whole South China Sea issue is what? It is to prepare for war. It has nothing to do with freedom of navigation or China's aggression. China is there. The United States is not. But yet the United States is training its Marines all up and down the first island chain in order to fight a war with China. So this overall strategy holds promise. It faces significant hurdles, however, especially for war to break out. So this is what's hilarious about this, is it's another kind of Ukraine warning. Logistical challenges in a vast maritime region. Timely delivery of equipment and new technology is complicated by budget battles in Congress, an overstressed defense industry, and uncertainty over whether regional partners like Japan would allow U.S. forces to fight from their islands. That piece is key. Beijing sees the U.S. strategy of deepening security alliances in the Pacific as escalatory, which unnerves some officials and partner nations who fear that they could get drawn into a conflict between the two powers, right? So they need, this is the big uncertainty, they need Japan to allow, they need all these countries to allow the United States to fight from their islands. What does that mean? It means you have no sovereignty. That's what it means. There's no sovereignty for these forces. These forces are completely and utterly beholden. These nations, they are beholden to the United States. That's what it means. Beijing's aggressive military modernization investment over the past 2 decades have challenged the U.S.'s ability to control the seas and skies in any conflict in the Western Pacific. China has vastly expanded its reach in the Pacific, building artificial islands for military outposts in the South China Sea and seeking to expand bases in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, including a naval facility in Cambodia that U.S. intelligence says is for the exclusive use of the People's Liberation Army. Now, mind you, what's so interesting is that not only, so it says China is the region's largest army, air force, and navy, and also home field advantage. 1 million troops, 3,000 aircraft, and 300 vessels about in proximity to any potential battle. Meanwhile, U.S. ships and planes must travel thousands of miles or rely on the goodwill of allies who station troops and weapons. The PLA has orders of magnitude more ground-based long-range missiles than the U.S. military. So there's a red flag there. But what's so interesting about this red flag, okay, is that it comes as they're saying that Beijing is the one, China is the one that's so aggressive. China's military budget is still just a fraction of the US's. The US spends nearly $1 trillion of what we know US dollars, likely more. Scott Ritter and many others have reported and talked about the, Lee Camp and others have put a massive amount of money that is just, trillions of dollars gone in these audits of just money we don't know where it went that actually went into the US military's coffers and all of its respective branches. So all this is to say is that China, with a military budget a fraction of the size, I believe it's somewhere up around 200 billion US dollars, less than a quarter of what the United States spends on the military, yet it has these capabilities. What does that tell you? It has these capabilities to stand and hold its own, if not fight back and destroy any kind of attempt by the United States if it were to fight some kind of amphibious battle, which I don't think it would. I think it would have to go nuclear right away. But that's not the point. The point here is that if the United States decided to get into a shooting war with China, China has capabilities with a much bigger population, a much smaller military budget, which says that what does this say about the U.S. empire? It says not only is it a paper tiger, but it's also extremely wasteful. It's also hurting not just people all around the world under its crosshairs, It's hurting us. It's hurting people. It's hurting human beings. It's hurting people, especially in the United States. So Taiwan, a close U.S. partner, is most directly in China's crosshairs, they say. Xi Jinping has promised to reunite, if necessary, by force, the self-governing island. A successful invasion would not only result in widespread death and destruction in Taiwan, but also have catastrophic economic consequences due to a disruption in the semiconductor industry and maritime traffic in the world's busiest sea lanes, the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea. That would create enormous uncertainty for businesses. And this is what's funny. They always talk about this danger, right? This danger. I just want to show you something. So Taiwan the island of Taiwan just had a brutal earthquake hit. Okay. And I want to show you what Vicegrad, this absolute mouthpiece of the collective West, it claims itself. And I'll get back to the article in a second. But I want to show you. Here's what Vicegrad had to say, right? This mouthpiece of the collective West. It said, breaking. A 7.5 magnitude earthquake just struck off the coast of Taiwan moments ago. Hopefully, all the people in semiconductor factories are okay. It literally equalized that when this earthquake hit, and this was April 3rd, when this earthquake hit, it highlighted I highlighted the semiconductor factories, but it said people and semiconductor factories. It's quite clear where the priority for the folks so concerned about Taiwan, where their heads are really at. So back to the article, it talks about the vision and the challenge. I'm not going to go too much further into this. It says it's going to fight back with a force design that stresses a vision called for deployment of Marines, placing units on the front line, making them invisible to radar and other electronic detection. The idea is to use stand-in forces up to thousands in theater at any one time to enable larger joint forces to deploy its collective might against a major foe. The aspiration is for the new formation to be first on the ground in a conflict where it can gather information to send coordinates to Air Force B-1 bombers so it can fire missiles at a Chinese frigate hundreds of miles away, or send target data to a Philippine counterpart that can aim a cruise missile at a destroyer in the contested South China Sea. It's a daunting mission. Even if you get Marines into these remote locations, resupplying them over time is something that needs to be rehearsed and practiced repeatedly in combat conditions, said a RAND Corporation researcher. Just because you can move it in peacetime doesn't mean you'll be able to in warfare, especially over long periods of times. Though the Marines are no longer weighed down by tanks, the new littoral combat team and infantry battalion will be operating advanced weapons that can fire missiles at enemy ships 100 nautical miles away. By October, each of these will have 18 Rogue and Nemesis unmanned truck-based launchers capable of firing 2 naval strike missiles at a time. But it weighs 2,200 pounds, these strike missiles, and resupplying these weapons in austere islands without runways requires watercraft, which move slowly, or helicopters, which can carry only a limited quantity at a time. So you see here, I can continue to go, that this is suicidal, first of all, that they're trying to be as lethal as they can while also trying to be as heavy-handed as they can, and they're also trying to be as mobile as they can. Essentially, they're trying to train for a real war with China, right? And I can go on and on with this, but this article is incredibly long, and it's all to stress the point that they're preparing for a China war. So that is to say that this is what's going on. This is actually happening now. Forget the rhetoric. We always focus a lot on rhetoric politically in the collective West because that's really all we ever get. The reality is always much different. The reality is that the United States is on the warpath with China, and that has not changed. Even in talks that are supposed to be cordial. Here's Politico. You have Janet Yellen visiting China again. There's supposed to be cordial talks. There's supposed to be talks that facilitate stronger economic ties between the U.S. and China. And what does the United States do instead? It threatens China. Significant consequences if Chinese firms help Russia's war in Ukraine. How long have they been saying this? How long have they been trying to say that Russia has militarily assisted Russia and Ukraine, which is absolutely ridiculous? China, of course, has increased its trade with Russia in all fields, minus military. But of course, military production is very important in Russia. And so who's this? China can trade with Russia what it wants. It does not follow sanctions. If Russia uses those things indirectly to aid its military production, that's not against there's no law against that. So they're just making threats because they want more sanctions on China. And here's Janet Yellen meeting with Dhaiphong, and they said there will be significant consequences, said Janet Yellen, if companies in China support Russia's war in Ukraine. This followed talks in Guangzhou, where U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said at NATO headquarters in Brussels that China continues to provide materials to support Russia's defense industrial base. During her meetings with the local authorities and in bilateral talks with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng, Yellen emphasized that companies, including those in the PRC, must not provide material support for Russia's war against Ukraine, including support to Russia's defense industrial base and the significant consequences if they do so. So there will be significant consequences. We've been clear with China that we see Russia is gaining support from goods that Chinese firms are supplying to Russia. This is Janet Yellen. Neither of us want this to be an issue with our bilateral relationship, so we're working together. So the threats. And what do you think the threats are? Because it's not just that, because she talked about global industrial capacity and the fact that China is flooding the US with cheap goods. Meanwhile, there's major tariffs on China, which make that a very difficult thing to do. But China's value chains are much more advanced than they ever been. There's a lot of threats. They want China to essentially give up its industrial base by eliminating all government subsidies to industries, which is meanwhile exactly what governments do when they want industries to invest. The United States did it in World War II. During the period of the Great Depression, World War II, when the United States needed to heavily industrialize to pull itself out of that, and also to uh, uh, fight in World War II and then launch an empire afterward. And China is doing it in China with, of course, much different aims, not to prepare to become a military empire per se, but of course to become the economic juggernaut that it is. Janet Yellen wants to take that away, and she's threatening China with really sanctions, because that's what the Treasury Department does, and or the Commerce Department does it. The Treasury Department basically is the one that gives the, how should I say, rhetorical and political green light. That is what she threatened. So all across this, all across the military fronts, the political fronts, the economic fronts, it is about war. Okay. And one of my favorite authors, and I'll just read you his very brief opinion piece, because I agree with this assessment wholeheartedly. Alex Lowe, he says, the United States is in the South China Morning Post, leaves a mess in Ukraine, moves on to China. The State Department's #2 now admits AUKUS's joint submarine project between 3 of the 5 eyes is tied to Taiwan and mainland China. So the U.S. State Department, as at the U.S. State Department, the Ukraine girl is out and the China guy is in. From Washington's perspective, it was a right assignment. Whether that's good for Asia and world peace is a different matter. It means the militarization of U.S. diplomacy against China gets another big push with new Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell, who is considered a China expert, really a China hawk. As he told the Center for New American Security, the Washington-based Center for New American Security this week, there's a need to link AUKUS's nuclear-powered submarine project between Australia, Britain, and the U.S. to the defense of Taiwan. While that agenda was widely assumed, it was rarely blatantly stated. Enormous implications in a variety of scenarios for AUKUS include cross-strait circumstances, Kurt Campbell said. I would argue that working closely with other nations, not just diplomatically, but in defense avenues, has the consequence of strengthening peace and stability more generally. Sure, flooding military hardware into an already tense region to make it even more volatile would strengthen peace and stability. As Orwell wrote in Double Speak, war's peace. Meanwhile, Washington's proxy war in Ukraine is going down the drain. And so, with Victoria Nuland, there's an emerging consensus in the U.S. that the Russian problem is short-term and manageable, but the China threat is real and generational. Donald Trump's disavowal notwithstanding, the war in Ukraine is increasingly seen as a lost cause, so much for it being existential to the free world. William Burns said recently, we have a short-term problem in the form of Russia, a bigger long-term problem in the form of China. So there you have it. I mean, do I have to go on and on with this? Despite the fact that they've invested so much in Ukraine and now, of course, in defending Israel, China is still a top priority, with Kurt Campbell talking explicitly about maneuvering all of these military alliances like AUKUS, the Australia, UK, and US pact, toward the cross-straits war scenario. This is something that, of course, the Center of New American Security, which he was speaking at, this State Department and U.S. government-funded think tank, that's what they've been playing out. They've been playing this scenario out. So all of this is to say is that war with China is very real, and it's coming. And we have to keep heeding these developments and understanding that for the United States, there is no front more important, and that all other fronts are supposed to lead here to this broader war with China. Whether we look at West Asia, which in many ways, as Colonel Lawrence Wilkinson has said, a lot of what the United States does in the Middle East is to sever China and in large part also Russia's ability to integrate West Asia with East Asia and with the rest of Asia. For example, through the Belt and Road Initiative, a big part of destabilizing the Middle East is about that. And of course, when it comes to Ukraine, to be able to stick a dagger in the back of Russia through Ukraine is integral, as they always say, into preparing for this broader war with China. How many times have we heard US officials say this, from people like Oliver North all the way up to people like Lloyd Austin? They all say that there is a need to show that they need to show China that they cannot be defeated in Ukraine by Russia. It's all connected. They're all linked. So this war with China is coming, and it's happening on multiple fronts, but it's also happening directly in the theater of the Asia Pacific. And we cannot close our eyes to this regardless of whatever else is happening in the world. It has to be part of the conversation. So make it part of the conversation. Make it part of the movement. Make it part of any discussion about peace, about sovereignty, about international law, about self-determination. Make it about any conversation about empire and the need for the empire not just to fall, but to replace it with something better. This is critical. This is the point of really every single video on China that I do here. And so I hope that whoever's watching will heed that call. All right, everybody. That's it for the content portion. Any super chat questions I will take. I will shout them out. I don't see any questions here. Let me go on to thank you for everyone watching on YouTube. We still have 3,000 plus, 3,800. We have 20 on Rockfin. Welcome everyone on Rockfin. We have about 147 on Rumble. I want to remind you that Rumble is an important place to follow me in case anything should go awry here on YouTube. So I'm going to pull that up on the screen now, my Rumble channel. I'm going to put it in the chat. I want you all to just swarm to the chat. Go to that link, okay? And then I'm going to show the link here as well. All right. So all my streams go up there, which is basically my full content. I do clips as well, but those clips go on to YouTube, and I would hope that they would also upload on to Rumble, but they don't always. So nonetheless, there you have it. Sign up on Rumble. Thank you so much for that. All right. So let's do this. Let's shout out super chats first, okay? We have KMR. Thanks so much for the super sticker. We have Road Warrior 2. If the attack in the aid convoys is anything, it's that regardless of your color, if you stand in the Zionist way, they'll dispose of you as easily as they breathe. Good point. Good point. Thanks for the comment. It is very true. Sparky says Newsom Kushner 2024. Oh God, please no. But thanks, Sparky. Thanks. Go Yemen, fight the power. Yes, thank you, Sparky, again for your kind words and of course support. Super sticker from Far. Thank you. We have Conan with a super sticker. Thank you so much. We have Nadia. Thank you so much. And Nadia is a very long time viewer here. So thanks so much, Nadia, who says the USA military budget is more of an embezzlement scheme than anything to do with war. The ruling plutocrats and spies are cashing out before the obviously impending collapse. It's a good point. I think it has something to do with war, but of course, that excess of dollars, yes, it's the point is well taken. It's not needed for the wars themselves. A lot of enrichment happening. Danny, do you think it's true that AI networks in China have been totally removed? I gotta say, I do. I do think it's true. The reason why I think it's true is because if it weren't, we would have had many more Crocus-like attacks happen in China than have happened, which I can't even name an attack like that in China. Um, the Tiananmen Square incident is the last thing that comes to mind. Maybe I'm not thinking of something, but I feel like there would be more unrest. The opposition groups in China would be a lot stronger. Now, what's interesting is that while they definitely have been, I believe, so this is a very good question. I do believe that inside of mainland China, they really, they've admitted so much that they don't have the ability to gather intelligence. They have to get it through Xi Jinping's speeches. When you're saying that, it means you're in rough shape. It means you don't really have access. There's a reason why William Burns has invested so much in a mission center for China and Iran, because both countries have done a pretty superb job of fighting back against that kind of infiltration. I think China has done the best and has the most capabilities in terms of its political leadership, discipline, all of that. Um, but surrounding China is a different story, because you remember there used to be a lot of Uyghur separatism that would leak in to China via really like jihadist networks coming from the border states like Afghanistan, um, the Caucasus regions. They would come in, they would train, they would do their business, and then they would commit these attacks. And so to me, it's impossible to believe that the CIA wasn't involved in that. I think we do have proof of that. But were they operating inside of China? It's hard for me to believe that they were. In Xinjiang, maybe, when those attacks were happening, I believe it was more happening by proxy. So that was the last time when major terror attacks would happen inside of China. And I still don't believe the CIA really had an inside of China, meaning that they had forces directly from the CIA moving along. They could have had people pouring in from the borders, of course, yes. Now, this is not to say the CIA isn't trying. And what's so interesting now is that China is on this push. I'm about to go. I'm about to go to China the week of April 13th. I'll be there for nearly 2 weeks. And China's doing its utmost right now. There's a goal for 50,000 people from North America to travel to China in the next year in order to facilitate people to people exchanges and all of this good stuff. Now, I mentioned this to say that China has been, especially during COVID, the pandemic, but really, in truth, for many, many years, has been increasingly cautious, not about official activity. For example, if you wanted to study there, they've encouraged people to study in China, etc. But in terms of access to the political system, that is reserved for, especially at the higher levels, the most professional, most trained folks, those who are most qualified, and usually you have to start at a very low level. So through this process, there is a pretty heavy vetting that goes on, and I think China has done a pretty superb job of preventing infiltration in that way. Now, China does have quite a problem in academia. There's a lot of so-called liberals in academia in China who tote the Western narrative and who are supportive of Western style, quote unquote, democracy and all of this. This does exist in China's universities. And what's so interesting about that is you might say, well, that must mean the CIA is all up in there. Perhaps. Now, the problem, though, is that in order for the CIA to really be effective, they not only need to be present within a country, but they have to have the conditions to flourish. So just because you have a university here, university there with a good number of pro-West academics, it doesn't mean that those academics are going to join your cause as an agent or anything. And it doesn't mean that you'll have the resources and capabilities of staying in China long enough to make that happen. So I believe that a lot of these pro-West academics are, for the most part, not agents, even if they may have contacts who may be. I think the CIA has a lot of trouble in China because China is an economic and political system that is very Chinese centric. And given that level of emphasis on Chinese development, it is hard to, especially in times where there's a war brewing, when there's a war that China is very concerned about, it is hard to penetrate. It is really hard to penetrate. And the CIA does not want to it doesn't want to, it's not really interested in small fries. It is interested in getting to the top centers of power and infiltrating there. Uh, and China has this very interesting system where, while there is contact and communication, for example, from the lower levels to higher levels of government, that communication is both very top down. You could call it quote unquote authoritarian. I would call it more authoritative. It is more consultative. While at the same time, those who are doing the consulting generally have to start out at the very bottom to get to the top. So really, either you're committed to the to what China is doing, or you're not really going to be part of what China is doing. And this is not even to mention the fact that China has become really good at security. It has had to become really good at security, just like a lot of these countries that had DPRK, Iran, really good at security. But it's had to be a security that doesn't come at the expense of people's livelihoods. It's had to be a security that hasn't come at the expense of people's well-being. And it's had to be one that, while in the United States and the West, you have security that is more protecting the interests of a very few tiny number of people. It's had to be a security that looks out for the benefit of the entire Chinese nation, even if it means sacrificing some individual liberties for the collective good. And so some people may disagree with that. You may disagree with some of the harshness of some of China's, for example, online so-called censors. But at the same time, China has said that we're going to develop our own things. We're going to protect our own markets and we're going to protect our people as a collective. And that means that some sacrifices have to be made. But will the benefits of that, the cost benefit analysis, will the benefits outweigh the negatives? And for China and the Chinese people, it's been almost a resounding yes, they do outweigh the negatives. It's okay not to have Facebook when you have your own social media and you don't have to worry about infiltration. It's okay to have Douyin instead of TikTok because Douyin is protected and it doesn't promote some of the garbage on TikTok and it doesn't have to deal with, for example, what TikTok is going through right now, which is basically usurpation and monopolization at the hands of an anti-China and now anti-Palestinian crusade. So all of this is to say is that China has come up with a model of development that fits its conditions, whether you like it or not, because the Chinese people have made their decision. They've said that this is what benefits them. The Great Firewall, that it's called in the West, benefits them. The investments in a certain kind of security benefits them. And the ability for the political system to both be what they call whole process people's democracy, meaning people are involved in the system at all levels, that it is one that does have a very people oriented and participatory nature to it, but also a strong consultative top down and what a lot of people say up down down up kind of orientation. It's not just at the top, the Politburo, whatever, the NPC, People's Congress tells the lower levels of government what to do. It goes both directions. So having that system, which we don't have in the United States, we have no concept of this. We don't, the local governments in the cities do not really say anything to state governments that's relevant to people's needs and interests. Usually it's the opposite when they are. Um, The state governments are generally not really communicating with the federal governments other than limited circumstances. There's not a lot of consultation, and there's a lot of unelected appointees, right? While in China, there are elections at the lowest levels, and then those people elect the next level up, right? So it's a more kind of direct, you could call it a direct democratic process where government officials start from the bottom and then they get elected at each level. So if it's like village level, municipal level, provincial level, then you go up to the people's congresses. Those are all delegates because they get elected each level up. And of course, then you have the party, which has its own political process, its own way of joining as a member, and then its own way of promoting and elevating talent and all of that at various levels of party leadership. And then you have those two processes coming together. So it's a very complex system, and it's one that's very Chinese oriented, and it's one that is difficult to penetrate because it's so solid and it's stable. It's something that works regardless of whether Westerners like it or not. Really, I always say that people in the West, the collective West, especially the United States, need to look in the mirror, look at their own systems of government, and think really hard about what needs fixing, right? Because the Chinese people, all 1.4 billion of them, almost nearly all of them, support what they have in the mainland of China. Why is it that the United States has the complete opposite dynamic? Less than half of people support the president at the best times. Less than a quarter of people trust Congress. Less than that trust the media, right? You have just an overarching sense of decay and conditions of mistrust, distrust, and complete illegitimacy in the United States' political system. Why is that? Is it because that the so-called electoral two-party duopoly is better than that of China's? Or is it because the actual character of the United States government, just like all um, capitalist states, what they eventually devolve into is not democratic at all. They eventually devolve into monopoly controlled, corporate controlled entities that are simply in their purest form managers of the affairs of a very tiny few elite who are looking to exploit and plunder in order to satisfy the profits of their paymasters. That is what the political officials that are supposedly elected into office in the United States are designated to do. It is why the most so-called progressive elements or anti-war elements or whatever you want to call them, populist elements, it doesn't matter, are across the political spectrum. So at the end of the day, they're usually going to support what is worst for the people, what is the worst for the people. And they'll always support what is best for corporations, for banks, and for the war hawks and the profiteers of war in the military industrial complex. That is the true character of the United States and the collective West and their ruling systems. And China is a different one. And so that has allowed China to protect itself from the vulnerabilities of that is experienced by other countries. So this is why it's so important to understand that when the United States is conducting regime change or any vassal of the any of them, but really when the United States, when NATO allies, European so-called vassals, all of them are trying to destroy another country, they're doing so because they want to install a government that so-called looks like uh, the United States or European model, but really just operates in a way that's compliant to them. And that's why the United States supports so many of the world's dictatorships, 70+% of them. That's why these governments always devolve into some kind of Zelensky style dictatorship because it's not about quote unquote democracy. It's about domination, exploitation, and war. That's what geopolitics is really about in this in the main sense. Geopolitics is really a conversation and an analysis of the geography of all forms of warfare and putting a political analysis to it so that we can understand the balance of forces in the world. And right now, the American empire is the one that is wreaking the havoc and that is in decline. And we're in a situation where a new world is in birth. It's very exciting. And it's very exciting to get questions like, has the CIA been totally removed? Yeah, it has been, I believe. And certainly it might not be, totally. I can't be so sure. There's no, we can only read the pages of the Western mainstream media and the officials that they cite on this as evidence because China doesn't really want to talk about this stuff. This isn't really China's business or interests. They need to protect themselves. And so, but they're not going to make it hot, as the kids say. They're not going to do that because what point would that how would that benefit China to provoke the United States? You're just going to do the business. You're going to take care of business. So, in a sense, that's what China has done to the CIA and their networks through its own political development and the security it's provided itself on all levels of development. So, we got more coming in. Okay, we have more coming in. We had does the U.S. electoral college actually matter? No, it doesn't. I mean, this year, I got to be honest. Usually, I'm covering elections at some level. I have, at least in the past. But I've changed a lot in terms of what I focus on here. But to be frank, I mean, maybe there's probably a likelihood I'll have Jill Stein on here because I really like Jill Stein. She's a really good person. I supported her in 2016. I believe I supported her in 2020. Did she run in 2020? I can't even remember anymore. I mean, those were really weird times. But yeah, other than having Jill Stein on to support that campaign because it does share my overall vision for peace, right? To unwind and defeat the U.S. empire. I don't, Cornel West. This guy was a friend. He's, promoted my work, my past work. And I'll always have respect for him on many levels. But in terms of what he has done with regard to the Navalny situation and some of the things he said about, good people, I guess I'm just not excited about that campaign as much as I have respected his work and his stand. He stand for peace and for Palestine. I'll always support that, and I'll always stand with him on those things. But there's some things that are deal breakers for me, right? So the Navalny situation, comparing him to Mumia Abu-Jamal, U.S. political prisoners, was just not. When you have Assange rotting in prison and Mumia rotting in prison, just not for me. And so I say it doesn't actually matter because first of yeah, here's what I'll say to this. I won't say it. No, it doesn't matter in the sense will it change political dynamics in the U.S. No, because people don't have power in the United States to affect political change unless they take that. They need to do that through their own movements, right? That's like saying, hey, anywhere in the world, well, casting a vote for just any. No, you have to look at the system, and the system in front of us says that no, there are people who have power. It's an elite class. They have the power. They need to be displaced, disempowered, and the system has to be redesigned in order to work for people. And unless till that happens, no, elections in and of themselves don't matter. But I'm not going to say, right, that if people are enthusiastic about Jill Stein or political campaigns because they want to build a movement to get to that point, no, I won't discourage them in that. It just doesn't happen to be where I sit in terms of where I do my work. So thank you, Nadia. Thank you. Here we go. David says, any thoughts on the conflict between Iran and Pakistan a few weeks ago? I was surprised these two countries have good diplomatic relationship. I covered that and I decided not to republish it as like a clip. And the reason for that is because it's hard to really understand this, honestly. I think that there's obvious problems between Iran and Pakistan. Like they don't have the best of relations for many obvious reasons, especially given Pakistan's relations with the ISI and Pakistan's very tumultuous yet pretty dependent relationship on the United States intelligence services. I think obviously there's problems there, but on the other hand, I think Pakistan has a very strange context. I don't understand it so well, from the Imran Khan to the good relations with Russia and China. It's hard for me. I'm not an expert, I guess is what I'm trying to say on Pakistan, but I think the conflict was so interesting in the sense that while on the one hand you had Pakistan supposedly angry about what Iran was doing in terms of firing at militants in Baluchistan, it seems like they're both in agreement that that needs to happen. So it's confusing, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and it's something I don't understand too well. But I hope that more comes out on this, and I hope that it gets pushed in a. I think it's positive that they have a good relationship because I think what it shows is that no matter how much they attempt to use Pakistan as this kind of um, nuclear armed satellite of U.S. Covert and overt military power, it's quite obvious that the United States can't get full control over Pakistan. And so it has this very interesting diplomatic and economic position, especially vis a vis China. China's relationship with Pakistan is incredible. China's Pakistan economic corridor, China Pakistan economic corridor, is maybe the most impressive um, development of the Belt and Road Initiative. I mean, I really want to go to Lahore. I really want to see it. I really want to go to Pakistan at some point in my life to see how it has changed, how China has been able to, through its cooperation with Pakistan, change things for ordinary people in what is a very poor country, one that didn't have a didn't have a single subway system until 2021, I believe, when the first metro was opened up in Lahore, if I'm saying that right. Probably not. But nonetheless, I do not. Davey, I got to say, uh, the Iran Pakistan situation, that's a geopolitical question mark for me. And so let's see what happens in the future. But it's quite clear that at the very least, things are stable. And that's a good thing. So that's it for the super chats. All right. Standing alone, that's funny. I'm saying it probably completely wrong. So everybody, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. I was a late night stream, Saturday night. Good to be with all of you. Some people are giving thumbs down. Um, so I appreciate all of you for coming out tonight. This is gonna be really interesting. So announcements. A few things before I leave here tonight. So Tuesday is my next stream. Okay, you'll see me with Scott Ritter and Garland Nixon, two very good friends of the show. I haven't had Garland on in a while, so I look forward to that. They're very fun together on their own program. So we're gonna have a good time for what will likely be my last stream. I mean, I'll have Wednesday night possibly, but Lord, do I have preparations? I have to get myself mentally and physically prepared for what is a long, long trip ahead. So a couple of things before I go. Otherwise, for announcements. In terms of, there will be clips when I'm gone from the 13th onward. So look out for those of you who can't sit through entire streams, who didn't make it through this entire stream, or didn't catch things from past streams. I republish those in clips, much to the chagrin to some YouTube viewer, I don't know, tastes. Some YouTube viewers are like, why do you do that? So messed up. This is old. It's like never are they that old. Sometimes they get a little old because I'm backed up and I'm one person and I need a staff that I don't have. But nonetheless, it's good content. Enjoy it. Um, analysis is always on point. And so keep watching, you know. And also for this channel's growth, we are getting to the point. We're not there yet. We're getting to the point where, yeah, maybe it will be possible to soup up. And, for example, I'm looking for a place where I can actually not be in the middle of the living space of my apartment. So even just upgrading to get like a so-called studio, really just a room independently, um, is a goal. Not to mention also upgrading production here so that things are more streamlined. Uh, all of that is to say is supporting monetarily here will go a long way toward those goals. Best places are, of course, annual memberships on Patreon or Substack. We have a great YouTube community here where you can be donating a small amount monthly. I think it's $4.99 or $3.99 per month to support that goal as well. There's PayPal, there's Buy Me a Coffee in the video description. And of course, super chats and all that is very welcome if you're able. So that is what I wanted to say. I don't think I have any other announcements. I'm going to China, be videoing there. I don't think I'll be able to go live because there's good internet in China. But I don't usually bring my laptops to trips like that. Just China's a very safe place, but I'm only gonna bring my phone. And I don't think I'll have a lot of time to stream anyway, because there's a lot of events that we put on that I'll have to be in attendance to, but I do hope to get some good interviews and publish them like I did last time. I do hope to figure that streaming situation out, because I do have a planned trip in August, which will be even bigger for in terms of my trip to a trip to China, which I'm very excited about. I'm excited for this one too, but this one will be more directed with context I have in the media, and they'll be taking me to Xinjiang, and I'm really looking forward to that. Really, really, that'll probably be in the summertime, late summertime. I'm hoping to get some really high-profile interviews if I can, out there with some experts, people. I'm hoping for the geopolitical people here, so some context militarily, maybe Zhang Weiwei. I would love to interview him, and maybe some other surprises. So I'm looking forward to that as well. That will be in the works this summer. So hopefully I can figure out that streaming situation. um, with all that said, everybody, I'm looking forward to the trip. Oh man, people are mentioning people in China. Yeah, I do have to get in touch with Ben. Um, Somebody asked, will you get Galloway on your show? I want to, Mark. I'm trying. He's a very busy man these days. I love George Galloway is a good friend of this show. He's been on a couple times. I'm gonna try to get him on again as soon as I can. You just reminded me to reach back out to George. I'm also trying to get Ali Abunima. So for some guests, it might take a while. People are very busy these days. So Ali Abunima, some others I'm trying to get on, but it's been a little bit of a slower trek. Okay. There will be more. Um, there will be guests on this channel. Don't worry. In May, I'm going on a big long trip in June, actually, for a vacation with my wife. So maybe less then. But nonetheless, everyone, the show's been great. You've all been great. Make sure before you leave here, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, most importantly, hit that notifications bell, and be sure to go to the video description and support in any way you can if you are able to monetarily. I will be back again at Tuesday with Scott Ritter and Garland Nixon. Be well. Good night. Good night to the moderators. Thanks for all your hard work here, where I saw some other ones I missed. Thanks to all the YouTube members who are here as well. And really, thanks to everybody. It's been great. Take care. Good night.